I don't know when it ended. I don't remember. I remember the noises, but I don't remember the noises going away. I just remember Miss Simpson opened the door, and I was like, "What are you doing?" Because I think I didn't realize it was over, and I thought, "What's happening?" And so she said, "We have to get out of here, and get to the kids." And that's when I think I realized it was over and it was gone. And so she opened the door, and when she opened the door, the debris was about up to our knees, and so we had to step up on to the debris. And she kind of gave us, all of our walls were still standing in the bathroom. And so she gave us a little bit of a clue of what we're about to walk out to. She said, there's a car in the office, and you just need to be careful when you walk out. And so we walked out, stepped up on the debris, and we walked onto desks that were built into the wall, so they hadn't gone anywhere. So we stood on the 2 secretary desks, and you kind of lose sight of what everybody else is doing. And so all I remember is what I did, which was I stood there and I looked to the left, and I saw a car laying in the hallway where all the pre-K had been taking shelter. And so you kind of just take a breath, and you just, it was the craziest thing. It was almost like we were an anthill, and there were ants everywhere, because you just saw people running and yelling and running to the school, and there were people already throwing debris and getting kids, and I haven't even gotten out of the office, and it's happening so fast. And kids are just walking around. And so I'm at the front of the building where pre-K, kindergarten, and first are coming out of the building. And so I'm helping with those little ones, and our best guess is there were about anywhere from 3 kids left per class to about 10 and 15 at the bigger grades. And so we were kind of gathering in the parking lot area, and as people came and helped, they were triaging kids' injuries and adult injuries, and just gathering in the parking lot. And then the sirens went off again. We didn't know if that was all clear or if another one's coming, and so we, everybody's just looking at me like, what do we do? Kids and some teachers, what do we do? And so I tell kids, there's this little, really it's just a ditch, but a little creek area. And so we were going to go to that because there was a very small bridge. And then the sirens went off. And so we kind of looked around and realized, I think that was either an all clear or a mess up, or alerting the other side of Moore that they still were under it. Not sure what it was, but then it went away and there were no other tornadoes coming. And so we went back to the parking lot where we just had kids sitting anywhere that was safe, where there wasn't dangerous debris. And I remember, after a little bit, some people started yelling that there was an ambulance at the end of this one street, and we just needed to get kids to that ambulance. And so as parents started coming, and as parents came and took kids, I knew most of my parents, especially because I did car duty at the end of every day, and so I'd seen their faces. I wasn't worried when a parent would take a kid, but then when we talked about putting kids in ambulances and stuff like that, I started to think, well, how are we going to track all this? So on my phone, I opened the notebook app and just started putting kids' names in it, which was hard because you couldn't think of how to type and how to spell a kid's name and how the phone even worked at that point. And really just walking around, I remember there was already media there, and people try to put a camera in my face and ask me questions, and I just kept telling them to go away. I didn't know what was going on. You just really don't know what's happening. And so I'm walking kind of around the building to the 2nd and 3rd grade area, helping kids walk from that building to the front parking lot where we're sitting kids, and kind of making a central hub for people to come find their kid. And it was just, there was chaos. I still remember one adult coming out of the building with just blood covering her face, and she didn't know what she was doing or where she was. And students similar to that. But we were doing our best, and we were, being aware of what we could safety-wise. And since I had been hit on the head, a couple people kept trying to get me assessed, and I was fine and never lost consciousness, and I wasn't worried about that. But this one man was really trying to take me to get checked. I'm fine. I'm an adult. I can take care of myself. We have children here who are terrified, who can't find their parents, and have just witnessed the worst thing they will ever experience, and you wanted me to get my head checked. That was not necessary. It just wasn't. I don't know my timeline. I know both my parents were able to show up. I know my husband was able to get there. My own children were safe, and so I didn't have to worry about anything other than helping my Plaza kids. That was my priority. I hadn't made contact with Miss Simpson for a while because she was working on one area of the building and I was working on the other, and so I was coming around to the back of the main building and I ran into her and I said, "Hey, are we out yet?" Because we had gotten everybody out of the first, or pre-K through first area. And she said, "No." And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "It's not good and I need you to come with me." And so from that point on, we stayed in one area of the building to try to take note of what parents were coming and not finding their kids, because we had plenty of first responders there and plenty of people helping, but not people who knew our kids. And so the kids, the teachers, the parents, once they found who they needed to, then they could leave and people didn't hang around, and so we could narrow it down. But there was a church at the end of our street, which was kind of always what we said was our safe place. Let's say if there was a bomb threat or you had to get away from your building quickly, we always said we'd walk down there. That was that place where you took safety. And so we knew some parents had gathered down there. So Miss Simpson and I, we walked down to the church and talked to a few parents, taking names of who was still looking for kids. And so we had a handful of names of parents who hadn't found kids. And then we would walk back to the school and we would touch base. And in a situation like that, you don't know who's in charge, because we had Edmond Fire there because Miss Simpson's husband worked for the Edmond Fire Department. And so people came to help. We had we had police, we had highway patrol. You have people, there's not one person in charge leading it. And Miss Simpson's in charge of the school, but you just are doing your best to communicate. So I kept saying, we knew it was third grade because of the direction of the hall they were in. I kept saying, that's my grade. That's third grade. I do lunch duty with them every day. I know every single kid. Just let me in there. So they said they would let me in there to help with identifying the kids as soon as they got the kids to a safe and secure part of the building. So we just waited until we could get there to a safe place, and we just paced the area and the street trying to find parents so that we could just start to get a number of how many kids we were looking for, because they kept saying, "How many more kids do we need to find?" We didn't know, because kids just ran from the building. They ran to their parents, and we couldn't keep track. And there wasn't a roster that you carried with you because everything was ripped out of your hands. I didn't even take my purse, So we didn't know. And the teachers that were watching that area were taken by ambulance, and they couldn't report to us, and communication was bad. So when the medical examiner got there, they said that I wouldn't be needed any longer and that they would take the students with them and that they would work with the parents. So I decided, once all my students had left the school, that I would leave. And so my husband and I walked to his truck, which was on the less damaged area of the neighborhood, and we walked to the truck and he drove me to the hospital so that I could get my head checked out, that my head was fine, like I knew. And I had stepped on a nail of some sort, so I got a tetanus shot, and checked out and approved and went home for the night. So when I was at the hospital, I was able to make contact with my sister who lived in Chicago. And she had been terrified for hours because she couldn't get a hold of anybody. And I was talking to her, and so she's watching national news. And I guess in the adrenaline and craziness of it all, didn't realize this was national attention. And I said, have you heard? And of course she's like, are you kidding? Of course I've heard. And she said, they're calling Plaza Towers ground zero. And I was like, well, that's weird. Because it becomes real to you when they call your school something that they called, like the Twin Towers and the Murrah Building and things like that. So that was pretty terrifying. So then when I get home, or I get to my in-laws' house, and my mother-in-law's sitting there watching TV, and they're just scrolling pictures of my kids because parents are looking for them. And they're just showing my school. I just said, that's mine. That's my school. Those are my kids. The next morning, Miss Simpson and I spoke over phone, and she had been with the families most of the night, and so she was updating me, and she gave me the names of our 7 students, and I had a few minutes to process that before I hopped in the car to go to the church where they were waiting and had been meeting with people. Again, as the counselor, you just immediately are worried about everybody else and every kid that was in your building and every family that was affected by this. And so I ran to talk to my families that were taking shelter at the church and the ones that were there I could talk to and touch base with. And then, the days that followed, so that was Tuesday, and on Wednesday we had an all-district meeting at another church. And before the all-district meeting, the district had a separate location within the building for Plaza to go to, for us to have lunch and for them to talk to us and explain where we were at in the process. And then we all walked in together in the district meeting, and they kept us up in the balcony kind of away from everybody. I think at that point it became very clear that we were now different from everybody else, where so many schools were affected that day. But being the only school where like a death happened with us in our building felt kind of, isolating. That was really hard for me. I can't speak for everybody, but that was for me. And I understand why they did it. It made so much sense because you didn't need to be flooded with people or to be among all other employees in the district down in the bottom part. So I had a meeting and just talked about what the plan was over the next couple days, and that school was immediately released and we were out of school since we still had a couple days to go, and that we would have an event the following day for students to come get backpacks and stuff like that. But I do remember the day that they were going to have all the kids come to another elementary to get any backpacks that were found or any other items that were found at the building. There was also a funeral that day, and we made a promise, Ms. Simpson and I, that we would attend every funeral, and then we were torn between being there and taking care of meeting with families and students, and then also going to a funeral. So that was a really hard decision for everybody to walk through. And we put the 3rd grade students in a separate area. So they were in the library at Eastlake Elementary, and then all the other students were in the cafeteria. I stayed mostly in the 3rd grade library area. What I noticed very quickly from Moore was they took as many resources as they could. One of my first meetings over at the makeshift administration building, there was Oklahoma City Public Schools there helping, their PR people. And they would brief us on things, that would be happening, or if we were to talk to media, what to prepare for. They never told us what to say or not to say, or what to do or not to do. They would just prepare us. Like when you're walking into a press conference, you want to know what questions may be asked and things like that. So they prepared us as much as possible. They accommodated us if we could make it to something. If we couldn't, they continued to push anything towards us that may be helpful for us. They set up, little counseling centers throughout the community for the summer for anyone affected. The counseling group met very quickly, and people wanted to help. And they would say, "What can I do to help?" You just don't know what to say at that point. So I believe that more public schools and the more community within the school system and everyone around did everything they knew to do, but there was just no handbook about how to respond after a situation like this. I think that the response that Moore's done since then to look at their policies of dismissal has been helpful. I know now working in Norman that when it's a severe weather day, there comes a point where you can check your student out, you're not penalized, so you're not worried, like, what if there is no severe weather and I lost an excused absence, and it becomes unexcused or whatever. Districts have revised their policies, and that's helpful because that gives the parent freedom to get their kid in a safe place. And it gives us freedom at school to help kids feel confident in the day and in the decision that their parents are making and things like that. More public schools has passed the bond that every school will have a shelter, whether it's a separate building, adding on libraries and gymnasiums and pre-K centers and things like that. That's huge, and I know they've already used them. All my friends that go to South Lake that have a shelter there, since it was a new school built after the tornado, they are more confident, they are safe. It's still scary to be above ground, and that's what you have to do with buildings like this. So I believe Edmonds also passed that. So there's a couple districts that have been able to pass bonds to get shelters in schools, and I've really seen the response of these school systems look at what happened to us and do their best to make sure that they're where they need to be to help their students. If I think about for my personal life, like how I can prepare for things or what I have control over, and then I go to, big wide policy and procedures. I know I have control over me. I know I have control over my day and my person. And what I learned was to prepare for severe weather days better than I did beforehand, one of which is to dress appropriately. It sounds so simple, but it's one more thing that you can have control over. I had on sandals that day. Miss Simpson had on high heels and a skirt because it was an awards assembly. We were dressed up. I had on dress sandals and, slacks and a tank top. And I now, when I know it's a severe weather day, I always have tennis shoes with me. I always have, athletic clothes if possible, and then extra battery pack for my phone because that becomes a problem. Extra communication with family and friends that could be helping me and my family, or that know which direction you might be traveling after work or things like that. So those are the things I can do for myself and that I encourage other people to do. To be very aware of what you can be in control of helps decrease your anxiety and helps you focus on the tasks at hand that day. Because we know this will not be the last situation like this for a school. There will be other severe weather days at school and have been since then. Maybe not at the same time or the same situation, but will be similar. And so I just always encourage people in schools to be aware of this because your focus is so much on how to take care of your school, but then you all are people and you're worried about your personal life too. So these things help control that anxiety. We look back and think, well, could we have had a clipboard with printed rosters and then you're marking off names, which you did. You could do. That makes sense. But do you hold on to your clipboard or do you hold on to kids? You know, so you think about what's really practical in those situations. So obviously that would have been helpful. We also told parents to run and get their kid and run away. You know, go back to your car as quickly as possible. So you couldn't say that the office would have the full roster. You could say that maybe a teacher could have the roster of who they had. And that would help with some of the chaos, and that would help with, you know, some of the confusion or just the worry for so long. There are little things like that. I can't say that I know a ton about what could have been different when you lose your entire building, because you think of all the resources you have within your building. But I do know schools that have little go bags, you know, that are safer, that you have first aid kits and you have bottles of water and you have little emergency blankets and things like that. That would have been helpful, because we were looking for blankets for kids, and we were finding curtains and putting them around kids and different things like that. And we didn't have things to wipe off blood. And so, of course, those things would be more helpful. And that's a backpack you can put on your person and you don't have to hold in your hand and things like that.